excellent day for an exorcism.
I've never in my life known a movie where people would faint. I mean, it's hard to make people faint.
William Peter Blatty's book, The Exorcist, landed in theaters in December of 1973. Moviegoers were shocked by the film's graphic take on the Catholic ritual of exorcism. In his version, Blatty used the character Reagan as a possessed girl growing up in Georgetown. Blatty was inspired to write his book after researching the events that took place in Maryland and St. Louis surrounding a boy named Ronald Edward Hunkler. From January 1949 until April, priests would battle for the soul of Ronald against an evil entity. The Hunklers moved to Maryland from Germany in the 1940s. Described as a slightly lonely boy, Ronald grew up an only child with very few friends. Ronald and his Aunt Millie had formed a close bond. Millie herself, being interested in spiritualism, taught Ronald how to use a Ouija board. When Harriet suddenly passed away, Ronald was deeply saddened, but he took comfort in the fact that he could use the Ouija board to communicate with her. Shortly after Millie's death, the family began noticing dripping sounds, like a leaky pipe in the walls, but the source of the dripping could never be identified. This was followed by a scratching sound, also behind the walls. It would begin at 7 p.m. and end exactly at midnight. Every so often, there would be a large thump somewhere in the house. The sounds, the family thought, were most likely a plumbing issue or an animal caught behind the wall. Ronald's mother began to consider whether or not the sounds could possibly be Millie trying to communicate from beyond. The noises continued for a time, until one night, things took a dark turn. Ronald was sleeping in his bed, when suddenly, his bed began to shake violently. In the days that followed, Ronald's parents began to notice changes in the boy's behavior. He was anxious and irritable. He was taken to a doctor, but he was given a clean bill of health. Ronald's family decided to try and reach out to Millie, using the Ouija board. The response they got was not at all what they expected. Out of options, the family turned to religion for help. They reached out to their church and asked Reverend Schultz to visit with Ronald. After spending time with Ronald, Reverend Schultz witnessed chairs moving on their own, scratching sounds down the walls, and Ronald's bed again began to shake. By 1949, Father Hughes requested permission from his superiors to perform an exorcism on Ronald. During the exorcism, Ronald was tied down to his mattress. Ronald somehow ripped out a spring and sliced Hughes across his shoulder. Later, after the failed exorcism, strange markings began appearing on Ronald's body. The word Lewis was clearly seen across his chest. The family took this as a sign and moved to St. Louis. Father William Bowden visited the home and listened to the family explain the events that had occurred. As the priests began to pray with Ronald, they noticed words scratched in the boy's chest. He began thrashing and cursing when holy water was placed on the boy. It was clear to Bowden Ronald indeed was possessed and needed an exorcism. The priests began their battle with the supposed demon inside of Ronald. The exorcism would go on every day for a month. Sometimes the priests would win, sometimes they would lose. As the exorcisms went on, finally, the ordeal was over. The priests had won. Ronald eventually went back to school. Later, he would become a NASA scientist. His identity and his past were a secret. The movie, The Exorcist, will go on to frighten generations of horror fans. But not too many know that the movie was based on a real-life event. A battle between good and evil.